And welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winick. I am the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage, and you're joining us today on our podcast, Leveraging Thought Leadership. Today, my guest is John Baldoni. John is an internationally recognized leadership educator and executive coach, and he speaks throughout North America and Europe. He's authored more than a dozen books. That in and of itself is a monumental task. They've been translated into 10 languages. He was named a top 100 speaker in 2018. And in 2018, Trust Across America honored John with his Lifetime Achievement Award. His work's been featured in Forbes, Harvard Business Review, Bloomberg Business Week, etc. I am blessed that I have met John a while ago, and we've shared a client or two along the way, and have been exposed to not just his work, because I was a fan before I met him, but the way that he works in person as opposed to just the written word. And I think you'll have a lot to learn from John.
Thank you,
John,
Peter.
Thanks for
it's a
joining
mutual
us.
admiration society. I really like the work that you've done. You've carved out a good niche that helps people like me get our messages out. And it's good to know that we have folks like you and your organization on our side. So I'm pleased to be here.
Well, thanks. And we can end there on a high note, and it'll be the world's shortest podcast. I appreciate that. Thank you. So let's the audience here are people like you, John. These are smart people. These are thought leaders. They're writers. They're coaches. They're consultants, etc. Paint a picture for us of sort of the planet Baldoni. What does that look like? What are all the things?
Well, that's a good question. I'll just
give
you my short, purpose statement, if you will. My work is to help men and women learn to live and lead more purposefully. So how do I do that? Well, my vision is that's essentially what it is, to help people become more effective as leaders and managers. My mission is that I do that by being a teacher, a writer, a speaker, and an executive coach. And so I do things like, I give keynote presentations, I give workshops, I write books, I write articles, I do videos. So those are my tactics. My mission stays the same, as does my vision, but I'm always trying to improve my tactics. I'm always writing about topics that interest me. I've evolved over time. When I first started writing these things, my first book is almost 20 years ago, I was sort of infatuated with kind of recipes about how to do things, and that worked for a while. Now I don't know if I've matured or devolved, but I'm trying to be more issues oriented. Part of it's due to the climate in which we're in. I'm writing, and I had the opportunity to speak on this too, but I'm more interested in the role that ethics plays in leadership and what it takes to be an effective and credible and authentic leader. And so those are things that fascinate me. And as you know, I go to market in a lot of different ways, but I'm getting my message out. Of course, I'm fortunate to write for Forbes and have for quite some time. Previous to that, I've written a lot of things for HBR, but I, write for new things. My video work, which is coaching oriented, is syndicated by Smart Brief, and so every month there's two new videos come out every couple of weeks. And I'm also looking for new outlets. Interestingly enough, I've discovered infographics belatedly. So I've been turning a lot of some of my white papers and articles into infographics, which is actually going over quite well. And it's just real simple. I'm not using a lot of visual abstracts. Mine are kind of like more visualizations. You could call them poster style rather than. But they seem to get the message across, and they do it in ways that make a particular point. They give it a little visual pizzazz, but they make it accessible and therefore easy to implement and actionable.
Got it. So lots to unpack there. Let me attempt. So first off, the core essence around increasing the purpose and ethics in business and all those things, that doesn't change, right? That's sort of the core of who you are, and everything that you do sort of stems from that. Then what I heard is we've got the various formats, the modalities, right? You teach, you write, you speak, the executive coaching, and then you threw in a couple others in there towards the end. You threw in the video, which I want to touch on, and the infographics. And one of the things that I recommend a lot in the clients that I work with is it's not only the new idea, because creative people, thought leaders, tend to sort of be overly, not overly creative, but if you cleared their calendars for a month and I said to you, hey, John, what are you going to do? You're probably not going to come back to me and say, I did some business development or I did some marketing, right? There's probably 50 articles that you want to write or another book that you want to do, something along those lines. But what's beautiful about infographics is you're taking content that you know has already resonated with a population in one modality, maybe it was in writing or in a speech that you did, and basically porting it over into a different way to communicate the same piece that's more visual, which might lend itself to social and maybe millennials, et cetera. But is that right? You're repurposing there. You're not necessarily creating a whole new base of content
That's
to
exactly
create an
correct. I mean,
infographic. Is
I
that right?
may come up with an original infographic, but for the most part, it's adaptations of ideas expressed in a book or an article. So,
Right, which is awesome because then it's just another door. And I'm always, sort of working with folks to say the more doors that you have to enter into your sort of universe, the better. So if somebody's first hook to you is a book, that's a bit of a commitment. 300 pages, 250 pages, 7 hours of my time. But if the first thing that sort of stopped and got my attention was an infographic, and then I clicked and I clicked and I clicked, there's so much more that you have to offer that it's just another door, right? It's not going to be the beginning and the end of a potential relationship with a client or a reader or whatever. So I love that. Then you mentioned video. So that was the first thing that you mentioned, outside of teaching, writing, speaking, and executive coaching, that is not dependent on you being in the same room when you're delivering it. So tell me about what you're doing on video and what the model is and
okay,
what the
let me
goals
clarify a
of
little
that
bit.
project.
When I say I speak, I coach, and I teach, those are my core strategies. Those fulfill my mission. All right. the the video, the books, all of those kinds of things. I mean, they're processes of my writing, but or and video, it's an acting. So those are ways of getting my message out. So I've been doing video now for, I'll bet you, 10 years now, and so. And my stuff's been syndicated on SmartBrief, which I highly recommend anybody to sign up for because it's free, and they have some major channels related to, certainly one called Smart Brief Leadership. Get that, Smart Brief Workplace, and then some other channels too. But then many business channels related to individual industries. But they're always looking for content. So the videos work for. I mean, I'm a coach, so people need to see, and they see how I express myself. So hopefully those messages are accessible and people like them. I've been doing them for a while now, and the reaction seems to be positive.
Got it. So similar to let's say being a contributor at Forbes, video is another way to get the brand out there, get exposure. But you have the visual, obviously, so people can sort of look in your eyes and see your energy level and all that sort of stuff as well. So is the purpose of video as a tool for you is really the brand building and the marketing?
I'm
You're
not
not monetizing
monetizing
those
them.
videos
No,
from what
it's
you
more
said.
brand building. And
Okay.
call me naive. I really, of course, all of this stuff is brand building, Peter. Let's not kid ourselves. But I always go in with the idea of trying to educate people, trying to help them, give them an avenue, and from that's my mindset. And that from that attitude, I think good things happen. Because if you think only of brand building and all of those kinds of things, which are important, and I'm not diminishing them, but that's kind of a selfish enterprise and it can be very frustrating. So if you think of more of it as the process of giving, it's a more enriching experience.
Got it. But the giving, and I understand that, but the giving that you're doing, right? Ultimately, you have choices to make every day, and there has to be some return on that. It doesn't have to be financial. It could be if you said to me, "Listen, Peter, I haven't made a nickel on video, and I spend 20 hours a month on it, but I love it. I just love doing it, and it forces me to be crisp and articulate, and it connects to my speaking. That's all fine too. It has to have some purpose, if you will. It has to
Absolutely,
fulfill
and
something.
it's both self enriching because I take satisfaction of it, but it's also good. It's another way of me getting my message out, and when I get my message out, I know people are taking away something positive from it. So that's a dual form of fulfillment, if you will. So,
Got it. So, given that the vast majority of your content is out there in the written word, right? So, because we can't memorialize a speech unless we videotaped it or something, and you've been writing books for 20 years and you've written a bunch of them and you're a contributor at many, HBR and Forbes, etc. Give me a sense of your perspective of the publishing universe today. Sort of a
you
loaded
and I have
question.
had many discussions on this, Peter, and I always invite. First of all, anybody in our position, yours and mine, it's valuable to write your message and get it out and publish it in however many formats there are. Um, to be honest, I think there's too much content out there. I mean, the business has changed since when I started, maybe blogging 15 years ago, and I hit the curve at the right time, perhaps. But if I were advising a young person or whatever, I would never say don't write. I would just say be more selective on what you do write and have an editor with you who can help you. Just don't write from a knowledge standpoint. Be in when you're starting out. Be more journalistic. So what do I mean by journalistic? Much less you and much more reporting on the issue. You can report the facts and give your spin on it. But if it's just spin, which so many blogs I read are, why bother? So I say, discipline, research the topic. You can write from experience, obviously, either, disguise an identity or whatever you have permission to do, but always be less of you and more of your message and back it with factual materials, statistics, data, things like that.
Well, and what you say is amazing, because I think what happens today, because we have all these tools and they're virtually free, and everybody could be a media empire and whatever. There's a lot of crap out there. There's a lot of noise, and that editorial process, which was really a selection process. Forget about the craft piece here, but selecting what goes in and what doesn't, because there was a much higher cost of publishing when it was in print or a book or whatever. You had to make those selections to serve your audience, and that function has been eliminated for most bloggers, right? So now you have a 23-year-old or a 43-year-old, for that matter, that comes onto the scene and all of a sudden puts a stake in the ground. I'm the expert on this, and it's like, what? Who are you? Like, I love the idea of starting this from a journalistic perspective and being able to tell the story with some research and some rigor or whatever, and then maybe being humble enough to sort of grow into that thought leadership piece. Everybody wants to start and say, "Oh, I'm a thought leader," and I've written on this as well. Don't ever call yourself that. Ever. It's like calling yourself a guru or the car salesman telling you to, trust me as the oil's leaking at the bottom. But starting at the journalist as through the eyes of a journalist, I love that, John.
Well, that's good. No,
Thank you.
I'm glad it resonated with you, and I agree with you. It's funny. I have been called a leadership expert, and by others, and I remember I've been quoted all over by publications worldwide and whatever. But I remember one of my favorite publications is The Atlantic, and they quoted me something I had written on an issue. And they said, my attribute was, I think they mentioned I was an author, but a self-described leadership expert. So I really I thought,
Ouch.
oh man, I wrote back. I said, I'm not the one calling myself that. Others do that,
But today it's easy. You can just say, well, they're fake news and it doesn't matter what they think, right?
that's kind of funny. But I do agree with what you just said, Peter. Yeah, if you call yourself an expert, then.
But let me continue with that thought, because you're at this 20 years, you're at this a long time, and even though I would say you're quite humble, you are one of the best in the business in terms of the quality of the content, the quantity of the content, the perspective, the point of view. Things that you put out there are well written. I have never seen anything that you put out there and said, "Wow, John had a bad day." Right? You take pride in what you do.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
When you get there, oh, my pleasure. When you get there, how do you decide sort of what lanes to stay in and what not to, right? Because you're known as a leadership expert the focus on purpose with a focus on ethics and business. There's so many other things that you can chat about and talk about and might be passionate about. How do you decide when to stay in your lane and when to maybe get outside of that lane a little bit
That's a really
at this
good
stage?
question. I write about things that move me, and so I'm not an expert in, and I try to stay in my own lane, so I know about leadership. Or so recently, I'm intrigued with ethical issues. Okay, because that's a natural avenue of exploration for me, because leadership without ethics is no leadership. So exploring that topic is fine. And the issues of the day, like the Me Too movement, or our tribalism, our echo chamber, fake news, all of those things kind of fall within a purview of how I cast it. Now, if I wanted to write for an automotive publication on, about vehicles, well, that would be
The new
fine,
Lexus you bought
but
or
that would be
something.
kind of confusing, and it wouldn't be from a leadership perspective. So I would almost have to, I might use a pseudonym if I were doing that.
Yep. And I think the confusing piece is right, because you might not like to think of yourself as a brand, but there's a certain expectation that I have when I pull up the latest article from you or open the next book or whatever of what's going to be broadcast from sort of that channel. Right. And what you said makes sense. Leadership, and if you're going to touch on Me Too and things that are going on, that all connects. But if all of a sudden you're writing about, late 60s, American hot rods or something because you live in Michigan, I kind of get it, but it wasn't what I expected. And I don't want to be surprised, right? I want to something that meets an expectation. And because you've built the following, I want to hear what you have to say now on that
Yeah,
subject. So that's pretty
that's a
cool.
very good point of view, and it's kind of like some things I've wrestled with in my career, because I would, my original career was marketing, communications, writing, and all of those things. So that's hence I migrated that area. But when I went back to school and became educated in different areas, I had to recast myself, and so people who knew me as a communications person were resistant to the idea of me being an executive coach. So that took a long time. For new people, they didn't know anything, so that was fine. But for old people, I had one client that it took me 10 years before they would accept me as something else.
Well, because first impressions, right? When you first came on the scene, they knew you as a Marcom guy, and now all of a sudden you're the artist formerly known as whatever. Of course it's going to take a while. But the new folks, as you mentioned, that you that came to you at that point, they didn't know that history, and it wasn't that you were hiding that history, but you had the goods to back
Exactly.
up what you were
Exactly.
moving
Now, the other
towards.
thing is that I think within the genre that I'm in, I can flex myself. I have fun writing. Choice of vocabulary or words. I also challenge myself. I can, at times, if I want to be lighthearted, I can do that. I sometimes get pushback from my editors on that, but I can have my own channels if I wanted to do it. So, but no, but you raise a really good point about being consistent with who you really are, because there's an expectation.
Right, right. Good. What else would you comment on with regards to the state of the publishing universe today? So, from your first book 20 years ago to your last one a couple years ago, what are the two or three sort of
Well, it's
incredibly
interesting,
noticeable
and
differences as an author?
almost as I think about it, I don't have another book in the works. I may at some point, but I've written a lot of them. But my first book was self-published, and I highly recommend that, because I learned the nuts and bolts of publishing, at least as it was 20 years ago, and it's changed. But and then I was went with McGraw Hill, and then Amicom, and others. But it's, I think, it's much easier to get your content out there. To me, the biggest advantage of working with a recognized publisher is, one thing is interesting. Someone told me this a long time ago, and it's tied to our conversation. Publishers, for the most part, do not have a brand. Authors do. So, for example, when Stephen King went from one house to Simon and Schuster, or vice versa, whatever, who cares?
But wait a minute, let me push back on that, because I agree with it 1,000%. But the argument that I hear, which I think is false, often is, oh, I have a choice to make as an author, right? I can go with a big, New York publishing house, or self-publish, as they sort of snootily look down their nose. And everybody knows the McGraw-Hills or the Wileys or whatever, those brands, those really make a difference. And my argument is exactly what you said. It's like, wait a minute, I don't buy a book from McGraw-Hill. I buy John Baldoni because I want to know what he has to say. And quite frankly, I don't care who the little logo is on page 7. That doesn't matter to me. What matters is you've got the brand, you've got something to say, and not that a big New York publisher would put crap out there, but I'm not, just because they published another author I like doesn't mean that they're going to give me somebody else I like. And I think that's, you hit on it dead on, and I think it's just such a false paradigm that people
I totally agree.
within.
Now, I mean, I think there are the New York houses that you mentioned. And so what I would call it as a credibility factor. Is there a difference between Currency and McGraw-Hill? Well, one specializes in trade, another one doesn't. So, yeah, but that's a credibility factor. And if you went back and forth between them, who cares? But people want a book by the author, not by the publisher.
Well, and given that, depending on what numbers you read, 35 to 50% of business books are digital, I think I'm one of the only dorks left that when I open a book on my Kindle, I go back to the filler pages to see who the publisher is because I'm curious. But I think I would argue that I'm in the very, 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 very small minority of people that are dorky enough to do that.
But I do exactly the same, Peter, because we are in the business. That's why. But I don't think anybody else cares. So.
Well, thank you for that. And anything else on the publishing side that is radically different?
Well, I mean, I think
or painfully different today than it was in the past?
From when I started 20 years ago. Obviously, there was Amazon, but there wasn't Amazon self-publishing as there was. And Amazon has been both, the best thing that really has happened to business authors has been Amazon, because you can get your message out there and your books, in a way, all stay perpetually in print. Not exactly, but they can be. So that's a good thing. I think the thing is I always tell people, if you're going to, I usually have this many fewer of these conversations than I used to. So I think the buzz is off of business book publishing. So I think that if you have an idea and you want to turn it into a book, fine, you should go for it. Rest assured that you're probably not going to make any money from it, but that's okay, because it will help you. Because first of all, you have an idea that you wish to share with others. You want to help somebody with your point of view. And if you don't, then why are you writing a book? Secondly, it will give you a credential. It will give you, a sort of a badge of you've accomplished something. So that's good, but don't expect to make any money from it. So,
and in fact, it may cost you money, but it is a forcing mechanism.
Peter, without question, yes. Yeah.
Well, even if you publish with a big house, because there used to be these things that have gone extinct, like the Dinosaur Store, called advances. So without an advance and the burden of marketing, even at the big houses, especially at the big houses, being pushed on the author, it's not that it's just going to. It will cost you money, because if you don't invest in the marketing, absolutely, it's going to die on the vine.
That's where you help authors, the great work that you do. It's absolutely, because promotion is so critical. You have to get your message out there. And so it's important. That is going to be an investment, and that's going to come out of your own pocket.
But and the reality is, and we'll just sort of end on this piece on the publishing side here, is there is not alignment between the goals and objectives of success for the author and the publisher. So for an author, for example, it might be, it forces me to get it out there. It's a brand builder. It's about the cachet, and the monetization is once removed, right? So I'm going to spend whatever, $50,000 launching a book, blah, 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 blah. But I'm a speaker or I'm an executive coach, and all I need is X number of those engagements to break even or to be profitable. But the publisher says, geez, we've got these costs and we've got this. If we don't sell 10,000 units in the first year, we got burnt on that. And that misalignment is getting further and further and further and further apart today. And as the author, you've got to have in your bag of tricks, what's the monetization strategy? Or if there isn't one, being aware of that and saying, okay, this is why I'm doing it. It's one of the reasons I'm put on the planet, or I'm passionate about it, et cetera. But the monetization strategy for almost everyone today is not number of units sold times some sort of a
Right, and
royalty
there's
or
something
whatever the
else that
case is.
someone I knew told me, or a respected author and speaker told me that the speaking business and the writing business or authorship are two completely different businesses, and that's true. And it reinforces your point that there are different hats that you wear, but there's also different ways of going to market. Just because you have a book doesn't mean you're going to be a good speaker or even be hired as a speaker. And just because there's a speaker doesn't mean you're going to be able to write a book. So there are two different disciplines there.
Well, and even from a skill set perspective, some of the world's greatest writers, I remember years ago when Malcolm Gladwell first came on the scene, I got to see him speak, and I loved everything he was doing. And he was an awful speaker. And then I was like, of course he is. He's sort of this nerdy, super smart, introverted guy that works as a New Yorker. But he worked at it. And then I saw him 3 years later, and he was as good of a speaker as he is a writer. But they're very different skill sets.
Yes.
Right. And people just, they're not the same. You could be an amazing speaker, charisma, energy, passion, whatever, but the ability to put thoughts to paper in a coherent way, not so good. Anyway, we're running out of time here. I could talk to you for hours, as I've had, and feel like I'd be breaking open a bottle of red shortly if we continue, which wouldn't be a bad thing. As we sort of wrap up here, John, how do people find you? How do they follow you? How do they get in touch with you?
Well, good. My name is my website, johnbaldoni.com. I also have an archived blog site, which is johnbaldoniblog.com. And on the blog site are links to my infographics, but also check if you just Google my name, and Forbes will come up, or Google my name and Smart Briefs, and it'll come up. So I'm pretty accessible, and I appreciate anyone taking the time to look up. And if they're interested, write me a note, and I can put them on my newsletter.
And I can tell you firsthand from my experience, John is the real deal from a coach perspective, speaking perspective, to an author. He's one of the best in the business. And if you haven't read his work or been exposed to it, I would strongly urge that you do so now. So anyway, thank you so much for sharing so much with us today, John. Lots to learn from you today. And I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you very much, Peter. I'm a big fan of yours, and it's an honor to be on this program. So thank you.
To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.